welcome to Relationship Helpers. These are your hosts, Vincent and Laura Ketchy. Hi,
Hello.
Vincent. Yeah.
Sorry.
So I don't think the devil wants us to record this intro for Melissa Gendreau's episode.
Oh, you don't think so?
No, I don't. I mean, we've already tried once, and within one sentence of our intro, our batteries died.
That is true. Batteries did go dead there.
So a trip to the Dollar General has fixed this up for us, and now we are this is take 2 of
Right.
the introduction to Melissa's interview.
Right.
But I think the great thing about today's episode is that all marriages struggle, and today's message really gets to the foundation of why marriages struggle, which is our spirituality.
Right. Yes. When we're not in right relationship with God, then our other relationships struggle.
It's kind of like an umbrella. If that's not there, everything kind of falls under that umbrella.
Right. When our big relationship, our relationship with God is not there, it affects all the other relationships, our relationships with our spouse, or relationship with our kids, with our parents, or with our friends. Yeah, it really is all-encompassing, I guess you'd say.
So today, Melissa takes a good look at what happens when a couple finds themselves in crisis. And a lot of times, it's just one spouse that will recognize an issue, and they'll feel so lost in their marriage.
Right, yeah, or one's struggling a lot more than the other.
And generally, this is the result, there may be like a medical situation that has got everyone, concerned, or it could be that, it sounds cliche, but midlife crisis.
Could be.
Or
a career change.
A career change.
Like someone loses their job, or
it's these different life stressors that, test our mettle.
Mm-hmm.
And then, when our metal's tested like that, if we depend on God, it's a lot different.
Right.
But if we don't depend on God, if we depend on ourselves, and we're so lost.
Yeah, and I think this depending on God is really, are we being obedient? Are we stepping out in faith in areas of our lives? Because the reason I say that is some Christians, you'll ask them, or I ask them, so how's your spiritual life? And they're like, well, I pray. Okay, they pray. They're praying, and hey, I do devotions, daily devotions. However, they're not really feeling close to God.
So they're checking it off a list, maybe.
It's kind of checked off a list, and it's not.
And of course, by the way, we are marriage counselors, so when we say we ask these questions, we're in
I'm not asking.
Session.
Right, correct. I'm not asking people in line at Dollar General
when you're buying your batteries.
Right, exactly. So, we may talk about this at Sunday school at times, too. But most of this is when what we're saying is in session.
That context.
Yeah, it's in that context. This is one of the questions that I ask my clients, and I think it's easy for us to get in that rut of doing these spiritual disciplines. They're healthy, but when we don't
ritualistically.
Yes, when we don't go any deeper, when it becomes just a rut habit that doesn't really challenge us, or where we don't really step out in faith and just be obedient to what Christ has called us to do.
So it's really the application of reading the Word and spending the time and not just checking off the list.
Well, yes, the application. I think it's more of about knowing God,
mm-hmm.
that actually knowing Him, than knowing of Him.
Mm-hmm.
Than having the knowledge about Him.
Not enough just to know the scriptures, but to spend the time in communication with.
Mm-hmm. And know how faithful He is, and know how much He loves you, and know, that there's these moments, because these crises, many people, I feel like they come into it and they say, oh my goodness, this crisis, which some may be very bad. Yes, they're bad. They're not good and not ordained by God. These crises just happen. God allows them to happen, not that God makes them happen necessarily, but these crises can be really an opportunity to grow in our relationship with God and grow in our faith.
So you have to be intentional about it.
Right.
All right. So in today's episode, Melissa's going to address this. This message is for the spouse that feels like their marriage is struggling. And you may be the spouse that feels that you're the one that's still going to church or still praying to God or still reading the Bible, and your spouse is no longer doing that. Maybe
right. They're kind of lost their faith, or they've
stepped away, or they've just seemed to have drifted somehow. So if you feel that there is some kind of what we call spiritual imbalance going on here, this message is for you. And it's also for people that just feel kind of lost in their marriages, too.
Right, yeah. So this is a good interview. This is where I talked to another counselor, Melissa Gendreau, and we kind of explore that and talk about how to handle that situation in a healthy way.
Yeah, this message is for the person that recognizes that the other spouse is drifting.
Here's the interview. Hope you enjoy it. Hello and welcome to Relationship Helpers. This is your host, Vincent Ketchy, and I'm excited to have with me Melissa Gendreau. She is a Christian mental health therapist, a wife, and a mom. Thank you for being with us today, Melissa.
Thank you very much for having me.
So tell our audience a little bit more about yourself and your background coming to be a Christian mental health therapist.
Absolutely. Well, it's been a little bit of a journey.
Okay.
So I started out going to University of Northern Iowa. That's where I'm originally from, is Iowa.
Okay.
And I went to my undergrad was in family services. Mm-hmm. And then I graduated, and I had no idea what I wanted to do with that, to be honest. I knew I wanted to help families. I wanted to help family dynamics. So I actually moved out to Omaha, Nebraska.
Okay.
With my husband. And
so you met him in college?
I did meet him in college, yep.
Okay.
And so I started working at Boys Town, which is a really amazing place. It actually is a village right in Omaha, Nebraska. It has everything there. So it works with teens who are coming from dysfunctional families.
So you worked with a lot of boys?
I actually worked with teen girls.
Oh, okay. All right.
So yeah, nope, the name... You would think it should be just boys, but yet they actually have girls,
right, okay.
too.
All right.
Yes, I got to basically be like the glorified aunt to 8 teenage girls.
Were you like in a cottage with them, or they came as like outpatient, or?
Yeah, no, so they lived there. They lived there with a married couple.
Okay, right.
Worked there, and then I was the married couple's assistant. So I worked there then for 3 years, and that really guided my decision to get my master's degree in community counseling.
Okay, so you worked so it was really, I'll call it a children's home, is what it...
Yeah, yep, it was a children's home, and the point of it was for them to then have a better understanding of how to live. It's a Christian place. But with that then gets the difficulties of we're only working with the kids. So we weren't actually working with the parents or the families necessarily.
Now, were the kids living there though?
They were.
They're living there full time?
Yep, they're living there full time.
Okay, right.
And so it was wonderful for them to be able to get out of the environment for a while.
Oh yes, most definitely.
However, we weren't actually helping the source. We weren't helping the parents. And I saw the disparity in that, and that really guided my decision to want to get into a master's program in working community counseling.
Yeah, so you wanted to help the family. You wanted to get...
Right.
Yeah, and I actually did similar work as you. I worked at a children's home. My title was relief cottage parent, but yeah, I was there when the married couples got time off. Then I was the one with the 8 kids and kept the 8 kids and...
Yes, make sure they don't run away and make sure they don't harm themselves or others.
Right,
yes,
do their chores, all that kinds of stuff, yes.
Yep, absolutely. So then while I went to grad school, I actually had an amazing experience to get to be, I did my internship at Offutt Air Force Base.
Okay.
So I get to do counseling as well with our military service men and women and their families and their kids. And so that was an amazing opportunity to get to help them in any way that I can.
Right. So you learned a lot of the dynamics with military families and struggles and challenges that military families have.
Right. And just a lifestyle that we just don't think of. Right. And it just from the civilian standpoint. And so that was an amazing blessing to get to do. And then after I graduated, throw in having a child in my last semester of grad school. And during that time decided, why not work overnights at the research hospital, Boys Town's research hospital, that was more of a lockdown program.
Right. So you had ones who needed more treatment there.
Yes. They were the ones where, so I sat in a silent hallway of children sleeping, to make sure that essentially they didn't hurt themselves or others.
Right.
But it was a beautiful place to get to, work on studying.
Okay. But I'm sure it was.
Time management. I was just being effective. But then following that, we had intended on moving back closer to family.
Okay. Back to Iowa.
Back to Iowa. Yep. And then, sometimes we have our plans and then God laughs at us and gives us other plans instead.
Right.
So he actually led us then to northern Wisconsin.
Oh, wow. Further north, huh?
Yes, we ended up being a half hour further away from all of our family.
Wow.
But there I worked at a child and adolescent assessment center.
Okay.
So the kids, so different, it wasn't treatment, but the kids did live there for 30 days. And my role there was to be able to understand what was going on in the family dynamics, what was going on for the child specifically. And the reason why they were there for the assessment is usually because they were having either failed placements or failed treatment processes, or they were struggling just that level of emotional and behavioral difficulties. So then my role was to try to understand them and get to know them better, but then more importantly, to really understand the family dynamic. And then my job was to make the future therapy recommendations, unfortunately sometimes placement recommendations if the family dynamic was really negative enough. But I got the opportunity to work with neuropsychologists, a psychiatrist, so from a career standpoint and really to be able to understand from a diagnostic standpoint and conceptualization standpoint, it was an amazing gift that I was given to get to work there.
Right, and you understood what all these other people do. Or the system, right. I guess.
Yes, absolutely. And then really to be able to see how does it all piece together. And even from, meeting a person and getting to know them, what are really important questions to be able to ask them to be able to get to know and understand the dynamic and the conceptualization so much better. The downfall was that it was an assessment center, so it wasn't treatment. So I never got to see any of the progress. I never got to see any of the growth. And it also was really hard. It wasn't a Christian organization.
So it was an agency.
It was. And while there are so many great things about it, as a Christian, I felt clearly there was a huge hole in the process. So but God asked me to stay there for 6 years.
Oh, wow. Okay. So you're there a while.
So we were there for a while. So, add another child to the mix.
Okay. All right.
Into the family. And one of the hard things that ended up happening too is for me to be able to do my job well, I also had to view the kids almost like a puzzle. I had to view them more from the standpoint of, okay, what's going on? Because some of the kids that were coming had some of the most trauma histories that you can imagine. So some of the most gut-wrenching things that have happened and experienced that for me to be able to do my job effectively to understand what was going on, I kind of had to turn some of the emotional components off.
Right. You had to detach some.
Absolutely. And that was great from a career standpoint. I mean, I was capable of doing that career-wise, but it was really hurting me personally, and even from a spiritual standpoint, because I was having to detach.
Yeah, well, it's emotionally taxing. Even though you're detaching as much as possible, it's affecting you.
Absolutely. And so really then God then allowed me to be able to go from there to then we were able to then move back to Iowa. I now work for a Christian counseling center.
Okay.
So, it was one of those where, that was definitely a stepping stone, and it was an important stepping stone from a career standpoint, because now a lot of my clients are kids who have endured a lot of trauma. Then, add on to get into work at a Christian counseling center, then that God recently told me to then, start a blog too.
Okay, so you started a blog about a year ago.
About a year ago, yep. And really it just seemed like he was wanting me to be able to share some of the different experiences that I've had, whether it's, from a therapist standpoint, with also from the Christian standpoint, because, I don't know that there's always a whole lot of the combination, right? Where there's definitely a ton of Christian bloggers, and there are some therapist bloggers, but there's not a ton of people like us that are, maybe both Christian bloggers too.
No, not a ton of them, and I kind of understand why to a certain degree. Some just, it takes a lot of energy.
It definitely does, yes, and so then that's been an interesting year for me, really, of just kind of figuring out how to balance that, how to balance the blogging stuff, and wanting to do all that entails for it to do well, and then with working full time, and having a husband and 2 kids.
Yeah, 2 little ones. Okay.
Yep, 2 little ones. So they're 8 and 5.
Okay.
So it's a little bit interesting, and
so you keep really busy.
I do. Unfortunately, I think I have a nasty habit of keeping a little bit too busy. So that's something that, that's something that God keeps working on me with, is make sure that you have white space in your calendar.
Right.
That's
where you don't have too much. So what I wanted to maybe talk to you about was working with couples where there's this disparity in spiritual maturity. Let's say, you deal with families, and maybe sometimes there are, let's say, I don't know, someone that's having a midlife crisis of faith, and they're either strayed away from the church or they've changed their perspective. What kind of advice could you give the spouse or the couple as a whole during that process, or if they're going through that?
The benefit is I don't work always just with families. So I do get the opportunity to work with, individual adults, but I do also work with marriages as well. And so, I have that a lot where, maybe a spouse is coming in, or they're coming in as a couple, and they're talking about how one of them is struggling, whether it's just life situation or, something has happened that's really caused them to start questioning things. And the biggest thing that I can usually tell the spouse is to meet them where they are. We can't, nor are we supposed to force somebody into faith. Most importantly is to pray for them, obviously, but not only pray for them, pray for God to be able to guide you as the spouse into how you best can help, how you best can love and support exactly where they are. I think that seems to be the hardest aspect, is people we want to nudge. I'm going to be maybe kind of picky on the wives a little bit. We have a tendency to want to nag. And that's not helpful. It's supposed to be a heart thing, certainly. And so if we're coming at it from you have to, that's not going to help.
Yeah. So you're saying meet them where they're at, pray for that other spouse, and then pray for yourself to understand how to meet them where they're at.
Absolutely. And then really it's just about an open dialogue too. Why are they struggling? What's gone on that's causing them to have this disparity in faith that's causing the stumbling block? And then with that, meeting them where they are, what do they feel comfortable with you helping them in? What do they feel comfortable with you participating in? Do they feel comfortable with you guys praying together? Then beautiful, that's great. But they may not. Also, as a spouse, being willing to allow them to connect with somebody else. Sometimes that can be really hard too. Okay. As a spouse, we want to be the one to help, right? Yes. And so sometimes that can be hard if our role then is to actually step back and allow them to connect with somebody else. If that means a mentor of the church or an elder of the church or a friend that they have where it doesn't have to be us to bring them back to God, if that makes sense. And that can be really hard sometimes.
So it's kind of making a comfortable environment for them to have conversations, and then at times maybe even pulling back and allowing God to use other people and not necessarily the spouse. to speak to them.
Absolutely. Yep. And I found that to be really beneficial then for the spouse who's struggling, who's struggling with their faith. If it feels like they are allowed to question. I think sometimes as Christians we worry that we're not supposed to question. We're not allowed to. And yet that's not actually true. We're supposed to question and allow God to answer those questions for us. And sometimes that means other people helping to guide us to find the answers. But we're not supposed to just have blind faith just because somebody says we're supposed to. Supposed to be a very personal experience. And for some people, sometimes their faith may have been just based upon what they've always been taught they're supposed to do. And so sometimes they also then get into a thought process of, well, but wait a second, why am I believing this? And that can be a process of amazing growth and then a really intimate relationship with God.
So maybe they've not dug any further.
Right. And so that can be a beautiful opportunity for spouses to get to see that growth and to be able to really encourage it and be a champion and a cheerleader of that spouse. It's obviously a lot harder if there's something really big and traumatic that's happened in their life. And then that can cause people to waver when it comes to, okay, so why did this happen, or why did God allow this to happen? And that can be a really difficult spiritual journey for somebody to be able to walk through. But again, for that spouse to be able to really meet them where they are.
It sounds like it's that spouse really needs to figure out, I guess, their role in the process, whether it is, you said maybe a cheerleader, or, if is it more involved where they're a teacher, or maybe it's where they're just someone there to kind of be a good listener, coming alongside them and providing that safe environment for them just to explore.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And the most important thing of trying to for a spouse to figure out what that role is truly to ask their spouse. Okay. Ask their spouse what they want of them. What role do they want, or are they comfortable or okay with their spouse playing? Because sometimes we can guess what we're supposed to do.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. But that's not always what the spouse is wanting or truly really needing.
Yeah. So we guess wrong sometimes.
We do. Unfortunately, we do guess wrong. And that doesn't usually help out very much. Right. But so often it can be easily answered if we just ask. The importance of that open communication.
Yeah, being direct with the other person.
Right. And if that spouse doesn't know, then it's a perfect opportunity to pray too. And again, whether it's that spouse feels comfortable for you guys to pray together, or if it's just then, the spouse who's not struggling, to be able to then take it to God themselves and go, really just, guide me and give me discernment on how I can best help and how I can help lead my spouse back to you.
So it really takes, what I'm hearing is a lot of going back to God, talking to Him, and trusting Him in the process, and not assuming what role you're supposed to play in it.
Yes. Amazing how that seems to be the answer in so many of our things, right? Trusting in God and not assuming we know better.
Right. Yeah. Meaning us not taking control or trying to take control of the situation.
Yes. And unfortunately, far too many times, I think that takes place then in marriages where we take the reins and we attempt to assume control of our spouse, and that can be a really significant hindrance, not only to the marriage but to that spouse who's struggling with faith. If we try to control that process, depending upon the spouse, it may lead them to dig in their heels even more.
So we might sabotage the process.
We definitely can, and that's certainly getting it wrong. That's not doing it the way that we're supposed to.
Yes, I guess unless we love contention or whatever, or disarray, which, yes.
That's generally a whole other therapy process that I'm working on.
Right. So from getting them to unhealthy to healthy. Well, tell me, in your counseling, when has there been, I guess, maybe this aha or light bulb moment?
I think the biggest thing that it was kind of an aha moment for me, really in working with all of my clients, whether it's from, kids to teens to parents to individuals in marriage, is really helping the clients to understand just kind of the progression. So, we have our thoughts first. And our thoughts are based upon our own past experiences. They're based upon reality. They're based, unfortunately, also on our perceptions of reality. So not actual fact. And it's through all of that our emotions flow. And then based upon our emotions is where our behaviors come, right? But so often I'll have either parents coming in or individuals come in and they're talking about the behaviors that they're wanting to change, or they're talking about the emotions that they're struggling with. And while that's legitimate things, we really have to back them up and help them understand what's the thought process. And we know that in 2 Corinthians 10:5, where he's talking about, we have to take every thought captive. That's a legitimate thing. I mean, that's a good understanding that we need to be able to be in the better practice of acknowledging what are the thoughts that we're actually having, and are they aligned biblically, or are they, aligned with legitimate, societal laws, or, the expectations that are legitimate around us, or are they things that either we've placed that, kind of almighty should on ourselves.
Right. Yeah. Or irrational thoughts, or just unhealthy thoughts.
Right. And how we're allowing those negative thoughts to be driving the rest of our emotions and our behaviors. And the more that I'm able to help individuals understand that, or being able to help married couples to be able to understand that, to be able to back them up of, okay, yep, you're right. We don't like the behaviors that are happening, or we don't like the emotions that are going on, but let's figure out where these are coming from. And so often it's from past experiences or misperceptions or flat out lies that we've come to believe. And until we can fix some of those things and really understand how to change and orient those better, those emotions and those behaviors are only going to continue. Everything else that we talk about from a therapy process is really just going to be a Band-Aid. I've, worked on how to explain that to kind of all age ranges, right?
Okay,
to be able to explain that to even the little kids versus, how do we explain that all the way on up the age range. And that I think has been really beneficial to be able to start the groundwork for a lot of my clients.
So you're talking about really getting to the root of the problem, or the depth there, which with these clients who are having spouses that are straying or going into that area, they may be reacting and based upon an irrational thought or something that's just an untruth or something, or a lie from the past that's really dictating their behavior of controlling the situation when that's really unhealthy. Right.
Absolutely. And then we see so much growth when they understand, where that the thought that they've been going on for so long truly is actually a lie. And to be able to then change that to a truth can be so freeing for somebody.
So what would you say is one of your, or just share one of your most effective relationship skill?
Honestly, I think a lot of it is understanding your own worth through God, and your own just identity in Christ. Because so often when I'm meeting with people who their understanding of their self-worth is so poor, that really flows out of how they then interact with other people. You kind of hold the bar pretty low if you're not loving yourself very well either. And so from a relationship standpoint of then how willing we are to maybe treat other people not very well, or be rude and crude and unkind to other people when we don't understand the importance that we hold to God. And then it doesn't flow out. When we talk about clearly we're supposed to, love our neighbors as ourselves. How many times I've had clients who will say, but what if I don't love myself?
Right. Or you don't love yourself well, or even understand your value or worth in God.
Right. And so it's important. And for some people that can sound backwards. They can view that as, wasn't that a little bit selfish that we're focusing on loving ourselves? And we're like, but it can't flow out of us. If we're not appropriately acknowledging how God loves us, then it's not flowing out of us well. And then if we are attempting to love other people without that understanding, that foundational standpoint, then unfortunately it's usually coming with a price, right? It's either how is that relationship then going to benefit me, or it comes from a prideful standpoint of, well, I'm going to love them so that they'll do X, Y, Z, right?
Yeah, so it sounds like we need to make sure that we're getting our love tank filled up through God's love before we can really serve others or be in healthy relationship with others, or to be in healthy relationship with others.
Yes, absolutely. I think we see that how often in people who are in ministry, where they forget to make sure that they themselves are staying very connected with God, and they start focusing so much on taking care of and loving up on other people without making sure that they themselves are in a good place and a good standing. And they end up really just burning out, or the focus of why they're doing the ministry starts changing. And we see that in families too, where if we're not first connected with God, and if we're not making sure that He's our first priority, how we are interacting with our spouses and with our kids and with our neighbors and our coworkers really just isn't flowing out the love that we're supposed to be. So making sure that we're taking care of that relationship first and foremost.
Yeah, so if we're not connected with God, then our energy or spiritual energy and everything kind of just gets zapped pretty quickly.
It really does, because we just are not capable of doing it by ourselves.
Okay, or at least not effectively, right?
Certainly not.
We can maybe seem it and fool ourselves for a while, but after a while it really shows.
It really does. So
tell me about what is your current passion?
I've decided to take on a bit of a project at my own personal church. So I'm going to be, I'm in the process of writing a Bible study for parents of teens. So the focus of it is to be able to help parents of teens to be able to address some of the life's most difficult topics that we have right now. Some of the spiritual and societal topics that really are causing our teens to struggle. Our teens who are in the church to really kind of question faith and question that in comparison to what society talks about. And so I'm coming up with a big study to be teaching the parents about the different topics.
So you're tackling some difficult issues, it sounds like. Very difficult issues.
I am tackling some difficult issues. It was actually a pretty great process. So I met with our teens of our church first.
Okay, so you're asking them, huh?
Yep, and I did. That was exactly what I did. I asked them, what do you guys feel like maybe your parents don't know or don't understand, or you wish they had maybe a better understanding of such and such topic, so that they can help you guys better? And I let them know that I don't embarrass very easy, so they could come up with any topic they wanted. And we kind of laughed, because that doesn't mean that the parents won't be wildly embarrassed. But
yes. So you made a safe environment for them.
Absolutely. And it was amazing, the outpouring of topics that they brought up.
Okay.
And so kind of the next step that I have done then is to reach out to all the parents and go, okay, same thing. What are the topics that you guys feel like you're not real sure on how to talk with your teens about? What would you kind of like a little bit more just kind of information about, of whether, what society is saying about these type of topics that maybe you aren't real sure, or what some of the messages that your teens are getting that you don't really know about. And then really with the goal is to be able to address some of these very real, big, difficult society topics, but recognize that from a biblical standpoint, every single one of these topics has an answer in the Bible. And to take that and make that very applicable and practical for the parents, but also for the teens to realize it's still very relevant. And that can be the area that I think our teens can struggle with sometimes, of, so how relevant is the Bible with some of our today issues? And so giving the parents the tools to be able to show them, hey, this is just as relevant, 2,000 years ago as it is today, and to be able to open up that communication for the teens. So I start the study September 9th at my own church. But so my plan is I really want to turn this then into a product for other people as well. So my hope is for that to get completed and written and made available on my website starting probably the beginning of the year, probably December, January of 2019.
Okay, so, that sounds right. And the name of your website?
It's humblefaithfamilywellness.com.
Okay, yeah. So later on, you hopefully to have that ready next year sometime.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, that sounds great. Sounds like a very ambitious project you have going on for the fall here.
It is. I that goes back to I have a tendency to like to bite off a little bit more. And thank goodness I can be a planner, and God allows it to work.
Okay. So we're coming down toward the end, toward I call our final lap or speed round. Tell me about what has been your biggest stumbling block in your relationship with God.
Yeah. I think there have been times that I myself have struggled with feeling like I'm worthy enough for his love. We're going back to some of those negative thoughts, right? Where
yes.
I can allow some of my own past insecurities to get in the way.
Yeah.
And so really myself having to remember and to focus on God's truth and what does he actually say about me.
Yeah. So some of those negative thoughts are really Satan's lies.
Yeah, absolutely. And how loud he whispers after we do something pretty amazing and glorifying to God.
Yes, most definitely.
And so those whispers can feel like pretty significant shouts. So making sure that then I'm armed actually with God's word to be able to remind myself of what does he actually say about me. So that can be a still hard at times.
Okay. And you say hard, especially after times you've really done a lot of work for God that's been successful.
Absolutely. And I think that, I will talk about that with some of my therapy clients too, where they'll feel like they've had really great success, where
yes.
they've made progress in whether it's been their anxiety or their depression, or they've as a family have made progress, or as a marriage they've made progress. Mm-hmm. And very quickly after that, they'll describe feeling like they're having some attacks, or they're having some times. And I try to change that around and change the perspective for them and go, okay, well, that's awesome. That's awesome. That means that you guys are really living life for God. And that means then you guys are actually being, you're being a little bit of a thorn in Satan's side, which is great. So let's celebrate that and get you back on track. So I try to remind that for myself as well.
Yeah, that you're being a threat to Satan. That's why you're getting that attention.
Yep.
So what is the best advice you have ever received?
You don't have to do and be all things.
Mm-hmm. So you can say no.
And I can say no, and it's okay. And that doesn't mean that it's going to affect my worth. Or unfortunately, I think ladies have that continued thought process in their head of, am I enough? And so being reminded that just because I say no or need a break or rest, that doesn't mean that I'm not enough. So that's been pretty great advice for me to continue to keep thinking about.
Okay. Who do you admire the most other than a biblical figure, and why?
My husband. He is stay-home homeschool daddy.
Wow.
And there's not a whole lot of those guys out there.
And he's your techie too, right?
He is my techie. But I think the reason why I admire that so much is that is not at all what he had envisioned for his life. When we first started dating and first got married, if anyone would have told him, hey, in 6 years from now, you are going to be stay home, homeschooling your kids, I think he would have laughed at them. Except then when God started nudging us that was the way that we were supposed to go, that was something that he willingly embraced. And so I just find that to be amazing that he's been taking that on, and he's an amazing teacher to the kids. And I love getting to see that his passion for learning, then he's teaching to the kids, and to getting to see that growth, and how beautiful it is that that his dad that's teaching the kids, and how great for that to be involved. And, then he has mom help with the arts and crafts. That's maybe the area that I get.
Okay. But he's really kind of sacrificed his career path. I mean, or maybe what he had planned beforehand.
Yep, absolutely. And so then getting to do that. So that's been pretty awesome. So he is absolutely who I admire.
What is your favorite book besides the Bible, and why?
Oh man. So that's a hard one because I read all the time. So I'm gonna break the rules a little bit and say two.
Okay.
So the book Captivating by John and Stacey Eldridge. I love that book as far as it's such a beautiful and insightful way to be able to understand women and how God designed women to be. And, you know, I'll recommend that to a lot of my female therapy clients that I have. But then I've also recommended that to a lot of husbands to read too. And so many times, you know, the husbands then when afterwards we'll talk about it and process through the book, and the husbands will look at the wives and are like, is that really how you think? And the wife's like, yes, absolutely. That is exactly how I think. So I love the vulnerability and the clarity that book provides. More recently, a book that I read, Everybody Always by Bob Goff.
Okay.
He's a delight to listen to. I listened to an interview by him, and then just his reading his book is great. How he writes it is just so full of God's love. And that's his project really, is just to be love. You know, he describes that, you know, that's easy when it's, you know, the people that you love.
Right. Yes.
It's not so easy when it's the people around you that maybe are not quite as lovable. And so he talks about just the process of loving everybody always, no matter what, and how amazing and powerful that can be for other people, and how glorifying to God. And so it's a really delightful, easy read. So I enjoy that one greatly.
And you read a lot.
I do read a lot. Yep.
So we're coming down towards the end. So share with us some parting wisdom and the best way to contact you.
Parting wisdom, I guess, really, I just want to go back to meeting everybody where they are. I find that to really be the most important thing that we can do for everyone around us. When we start putting expectations on other people, the relationships really start going down. But when we're willing to be able to meet them where they are, it's so much easier to love them and provide joy to them and get to be that support and encouragement that they need. And I think sometimes people misunderstand when I say meet them where they are, that means accept everything that they're doing. And I certainly don't mean accept everything that they're doing. It just means love them as who they are as a person. And then to be able to stand beside them, to walk on that journey with them wherever they need to go.
So don't be so critical or judgmental when you're first with them, but actually be willing to be with them while they're doing things you don't agree with.
Right. Absolutely. And I think sometimes that can feel very hard because you may not agree with what they're doing at all. And so that doesn't mean accept or encourage the behaviors that they're doing,
right? But
just loving them as people and then hopefully guiding them along the way.
So it means not necessarily accepting those behaviors, but it also means not ignoring them as people or as children of God or as God. You know, they're in God's image or created in God's image.
Absolutely.
So how can our audience contact you? What would be the best way?
So they can go to my website, and that's humblefaithfamilywellness.com. I'm also on Facebook by the same name, Humble Faith Family Wellness, or you can email me at melissa@humblefaithfamilywellness.com.
Okay, so that is humblefaithfamilywellness.com.
It is a mouthful a little bit, but it made a lot of sense for me.
Okay, well, thank you for being with us, Melissa.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you for joining us today on Relationship Helpers. It is our hope that you gained some valuable information. For the show notes and more information on today's topic, please visit www.relationshiphelpers.net. Again, that is www.relationshiphelpers.net. If you enjoyed our show, please go to iTunes to subscribe, rate, and review. If you had questions or concerns about our show, please let us know about this as well by going to our website, www.relationshiphelpers.net. Thanks again and have a blessed week. Note that accuracy and authority in regards to the subject matter covered today is not a replacement for professional care. Neither the host, the clinicians, or the guests are rendering clinical or other professional advice. Seek professional help if you need it.